Okay, Harsha, over to you. We start in 5.
Namaste and greetings. I, Harsha Quatra, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today, we are gathered here for day one of Feminist Foreign Policy in the Asia Pacific region, an online international workshop program, a 2-day immersive online discussion workshop. This program is organized by the IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, CIRSS IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. Before we dwell into the program, let's take a moment to reflect on why feminist foreign policy is not just relevant but crucial in today's world, particularly in the diverse and dynamic landscape of the Asia Pacific. According to the International Center for Research on Women, feminist foreign policy is the policy of a state that defines its interactions with other states and movements in a manner that prioritizes gender equality and enshrines the human rights of women and other historically marginalized groups, allocates significant resources to achieve that vision, and seeks through its implementation to disrupt patriarchal and male-dominated power structures across all of its levels of influence, aid, trade, defense, and diplomacy, informed by the voices of feminist activists, groups, and movements. It recognizes that gender-sensitive policies contribute to more sustainable peace and security, addressing issues such as conflict prevention and post-conflict reconstruction. In the post-colonial context, there's an urgent need to strengthen the spirit of networking and learning from each other's best practices and respect for diversity, plurality, and inclusivity that have been a hallmark for South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian, Central Asian countries, and Fiji Islands. The aim of the online workshop on feminist foreign policy in the Asia Pacific region is to foster a deeper understanding of feminist foreign policy principles, their relevance, and their potential impact on shaping international relations in the Asia Pacific region. We have gathered a distinguished panel of experts who will share their insights and experiences on this crucial topic. The chair for the program is Professor Vibhuti Patel, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI. The distinguished experts include Ms. Farida Akhtar, Executive Director, UWing, Policy Research for Development Alternative, and President, Nargitha Prabhatana, Bangladesh, Ms. Lavanya Shumbhokarwan, Assistant Professor, Center for Disasters and Development, Jamshedji Tata School of Disaster Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, Ms. Preeti Daruka, Founder and Global Coordinator, BRICS Feminist Watch, Ms. Irina Santiago, Peace Advisor, Local Government Academy, Philippines, Chair Emerita, Chair Emerita and former CEO, Mindanao Commission on Women, MCW, lead convener, WomenSeriously.com, feminist and peace negotiator, Dr. Wahida Nainer, independent researcher, gender and human rights consultant, and Dr. Atka Noor Alami, head of research, Center for Politics, Badan Risid Dan Innovosi, National Brin, Jakarta, Indonesia. The conveners for this course are Dr. Semi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI, and Dr. Arjun Kumar, Director at IMPRI. I welcome you all to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for putting your time, energy, and efforts into truly understanding the vital role and complex intricacies of feminism and foreign policy frameworks. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. It is imperative that you join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your questions in the Q&A box and not in the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. It is my honor to invite Dr. Simi Mehta for her remarks on the insightful session, followed by a book release named Advocating Feminist Foreign Policy for India. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Harsha, and good evening to everyone. It is indeed a delight and a great joy to be witnessing this day. This is a very special day as we are releasing one of the most pioneering works in the field of international relations. which is also a relatively lesser studied field in India. A book which is titled Advocating a Feminist Foreign Policy in India, which is co-authored by Honorable Professor Vibhuti Patel, Satyam Tripathi, and myself, published by IMPRI Books. Having specialized in foreign policy as my area of study, with gender justice as an area of interest and research, it is actually very overwhelming to see an amalgamation of both in the form of the work of feminist foreign policy. So right at the outset, I'd like to thank all my co-authors and the research team for having had the patience to work on this topic and espouse their brilliant analysis, contextualizing the unique position which India is at, of breaking the adages of being a land of snake charmers to a nation, to a civilization which is united to carve a space of its own at the global platform, and leaving behind a legacy for all the other nations to follow. The topic for feminist foreign policy has been discussed at international and global other platforms for quite some time, and it has significantly been gaining some traction and recognition in India. And as we'll see, and we'll be discussing more about what feminist foreign policy is, it actually is to define just in the beginning that it is an approach to international relations and diplomacy that seeks to promote gender equality and women's rights as central objectives of a country's foreign policy agenda. So given the stage of development that India is in, and the exciting possibilities that the future holds, I think, and we firmly believe and advocate in the book, is that the time is ripe for women-led development by prioritizing inclusive sustainability. And it is great to know that Women's Reservation Bill is finally seemingly becoming an act, and therefore proactive discussions on feminist foreign policy, specially customized for India with a global outlook, will not only address the complex and interconnected challenges related to gender inequality, but it would also contribute to a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world order. And this book, which is being released today under the noble guidance of one of India's most eminent feminists, Professor Vibhuti Patel, Satyam and I would like to congratulate all of us and also our publisher. Thank you, Dr. Arjun Kumar, Director of IMPRI, for facilitating this book. I exhort each one of you, as we will be witnessing the book release, and we'll also be witnessing very important discussions that will follow. I exhort each one of you, and those who will be also reading the book, to shed your inhibitions and join hands for carving an equal and gender-just family, society, nation, and the world. So with this, I would like to thank you, and I would like to invite my co-author, Satyam, for his presentation. Thank you very much, and I welcome you all to the session.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to everyone in this esteemed gathering. To start with, first I would like to introduce the three women stalwarts portrayed on the cover to whom this book is dedicated. First is Shri Vijayalakshmi Panditji. She was not just the first woman cabinet minister, she also represented India after its independence at the UN and later went on to become the first woman president of the UN General Assembly. Second on the cover is the portrayal of Shri Hansha Mehta Ji. She played a significant role as India's delegate to United Nations Commission on Human Rights from 1947 to 1952, wherein she advocated for the gender-neutral phrasing of the Declaration of Human Rights by insisting on replacing all men with a more inclusive wording, that is, all human beings are born free and equal. Third picture is of Shri Koyenara Beliappa Muthamma. She was the first woman to clear the India's coveted civil services examination, thereby becoming the first IFS officer. Now coming to the book, this book is an effort to make a legitimate case for India so as to conceive feminism and gender sensitivity beyond the debate of words and deeds, which themselves have become somewhat incongruous, partly because of standardization and also due to the skepticism associated with the semantic relations of feminism itself. Today, there is an apparent lacuna in gender dimensions of strategic thinking. Therefore, to set the record straight, explicitness at the policy level becomes necessary more than ever. Having said that, the book contains 4 chapters. The first chapter elucidates the background of feminist foreign policy, the concept itself, its origin, and the trajectories of the implementation of FFP around the globe. Furthermore, it also talks about the need for gender-sensitive approach in foreign policy. The second chapter contextualizes FFP in Indian setting, where we have tried to align FFP with India's national interests and how it holds relevance for India to advance its foreign policy objectives. The third chapter tries to follow up with the contemporary and emerging debates pertaining to women and foreign policy, such as the role of women in diplomacy, gender peace and security, as well as climate change, etc. It also contains the intellectual outcomes of the IMPRI events, which are an online monsoon school program on feminist foreign policy, Praxis for a Peaceful and Gender Just World Order, that took place in the month of September last year, and consequently followed by the other physical event at the India Habitat Center, New Delhi, on the theme Feminist Foreign Policy, Exploring India's Position, which was held in the month of October 2022. Taking cues from other countries' experiences, Chapter 3 also highlights the gaps in FFP and puts forth the tracking mechanisms for implementing the same in India. The conclusion, followed by the way forward, promises optimism and calls for international relations experts to assess socio-cultural, economic, and political issues from an intersectional gendered perspective, which will ensure a deeper appreciation for the gender differential impact of and responses to the existing as well as unfolding realities. Last but not the least, we would like to acknowledge esteemed panelists, expert resource persons, and all the participants who have been part of the past IMPRI events on this issue. We would also like to thank Dr. Arjun Kumar for facilitating the production of the literature on this pressing issue. And finally, acknowledging and thanking the research team comprising Samriddhi Sharma, Ishina Das, Manusha, and Fiza Mahajan for their time and efforts in materializing this book. With this, I would like to stop now and turn it over to Vibhuti ma'am and Simi ma'am.
Thank you, Satyam. And I would now like to thank you, Satyam, for providing such a brief, wonderful overview of the book. And now I'd like to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel for her inaugural address. Professor, over to you. Ma'am, please unmute. Ma'am, please unmute. Ma'am, please unmute. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Simi Mehta, and thank you, Satyam, for introducing the book. I would like to announce that it is freely downloadable. There is no cost of the book. Anybody can download it. Link is also shared. First of all, I would like to thank the IMPRI team, Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Dr. Satyam Tripathi, Ms. Harsha Kawatra for putting this whole 2-day workshop together. I know more than 500 people have joined the platform, and they are from Asia and Pacific region. Some of the stalwarts who have been extremely active for past nearly 50 years, right from the time of before the Towards Equality report. Professor Pam Rajput is with us. She has been to more than 85 countries over this year, discussing the global feminist solidarity and some of the important issues on women. She played an important role even in the Beijing Platform for Action. Dr. Shivli Kumar from TISS, Dr. Shanta Shrestha from Nepal, Beyond the Beijing Committee. They are there along with so many young scholars, journalists, students, research scholars, teachers, and also the political activists are here with us. I welcome Ms. Farida Akhtar, my long-standing co-traveler in the feminist movement, Ms. Preeti Daruka, who is playing a very important role in BRICS discourses, Professor Lavanya Shanbag Arvind, who is in the School of Disaster Management of TISS, and also tomorrow's panelists, I think Ms. Irene Santiago, Ms. Atika Noor Alami, and Dr. Wahida Nainar, who have actually participated in the global diplomatic discourses. They have been in the part of the International Criminal Court, and they have also brought out the important concerns of women and peace, and also gender-based violence on a global platform, galvanized UNHRC into action on some of the vital issues which were like of global concern, and also the concerns in Asia-Pacific region. Now, this online international workshop on feminist foreign policy in Asia and Pacific was envisaged after our last year's excellent response. More than 800 participants had joined, and we had focused on feminist foreign policy in India, because India is not using that term, they use the term called gender equality. And what were the experiences of other countries? So we had like around 12 resource persons were there from all over the globe. But this time we decided to focus on Asia Pacific region and with a thematic concern of climate change in Asia and Pacific region. Now, genesis of feminist foreign policy is in the transnational feminist solidarity of the 80s and 90s, in which international feminist movements supported local women-led struggles against devastating impact of radiation due to nuclear testing in Pacific Islands, release of mercury pollutants in the sea by Minamata Company in Japan, destruction of human life and reproductive health hazards due to Bhopal gas tragedy, Chernobyl nuclear disaster, destruction of rainforest and pollution of Amazon River. We all have been part of this global transnational solidarities as feminists. The famous feminist slogan, think globally, act locally, crystallized the spirit of solidarity, transcending territorial boundaries. For transformative change, they had to address political leaders, diplomats, global public intellectuals, and the United Nations system. Transnational feminist networks such as Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era, Dawn in 1985, end of the Decade Conference in Nairobi, or a regional initiative by Madam Miss Irene Santiago, who later on became also the coordinator for Asia Pacific region for the UN Women at that time. Asian Women's Research and Action Network, AVRAN, they played a pivotal role during the decades for bringing women from different countries and feminists from different countries on a same platform and exchange the important concerns. And they mobilized not only that to bring attention to or mitigate the negative impact of neoliberal global capitalism on women, but also to construct an alternative vision of global economy that is conducive to women all over the world. Women Environment and Development Organization, WeDo, which focuses on environmental health and biosafety, that provided platform to eco-feminist leaders such as Vandana Shiva, Maria Mies, Wangari Maathai from Africa, who started Green Belt movement. And they could also influence United Nations to come up with path-breaking document on gender and climate change. Because when in the year 2000, when the first document was put forward by UNFPA on climate change, there were no word called women in that, no? And then there was a lot of global outcry by the feminist movement, and the whole gender lens was brought in this new document. Climate change was the first framed as a problem exclusive to natural science. Due to efforts of environmental movement, the focus on role of human behavior in climate change has gained ground, and with this, an increased understanding of significant gendered consequences of climate change, they have also come to the fore. There is an urgency for inclusion of women as policymakers in climate issues. I think that was debated even in G20 debates, but there is also an urgency that feminist foreign policy take the gendered aspects of climate change into account wherever the policy has been adopted by around 16 countries have adopted that policy. In the trade agreements, in the aid policies, in a choice of technologies, interventions to mitigate harmful impact of climate change. I think these are very important concerns. And in this webinar, the panel of experts will show us how the feminist policy, because there is also an argument that it's a colonial, neo-colonial baggage, or it is the agenda of the Western feminists, and what can be the post-colonial or decolonized way of looking at the relationships between nation states and North-South relationships when it comes to climate change, who bears the burden of climate crisis and who is responsible for creating this climate crisis. These are very, very important debates in which the scientific community, politicians, social activists, and the professional bodies, they are very much involved. It's a very live issue. Even the children, this is the first issue in which you see the school children being so articulate and vociferous and proactive. So these issues need to be addressed with with keeping into consideration intersectional perspective and the intersectional vulnerabilities of geographic location, class, ethnicity, age, disability, and gender. And I think I'm so happy that today we have these three experts, Ms. Farida Akhtar, a veteran feminist, Ms. Priti Daruka, who has very specialized knowledge on the question of foreign policies, and Professor Lavanya Shanbhog from who has been working on the question of disaster management. They are with us. So thank you very much and the IMPRI team, please take over.
Thank you, ma'am, for those opening remarks. I would request our esteemed audience to go through the book, and the link for the same would be also shared in your emails. Now, I would like to invite Lavanya, ma'am, and start the theme of today's session is feminist foreign policy in the Asia Pacific region with regards to climate change. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. A special mention and thanks to the IMPRI team for having me here, and Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, thanks for the opportunity, and always my gratitude to Professor Vibhuti Patel for thinking of me in, to speak on such topics. It's an area that I very much like to be a part of the discourse in whatever small way. I just want to share my screen. I hope my slides are visible, and I hope I'm audible as well.
Working mode, make it a slideshow mode.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, sure, definitely. Very good evening to all our esteemed panelists, to the chair, and to the audience who have here with us today. I'm Lavanya. I'm from the School of Disaster Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and I'm going to be speaking about climate change impacts and implications while talking in the context of feminist foreign policy. And the tone has been rightly set, and we have an excellent book and a resource that has been released as well. We want to talk about how the foreign policy can transform the ways in which nations engage, how we can foster global multilateral cooperation, collaboration, diplomacy, and dialogue, and also by addressing the interconnectedness of environment, society, and advocate for sustainable and equitable solutions which are gender just. So what I want to first speak about is that climate change is no longer, cannot be looked at as a national territorial issue. It is a transnational and a transboundary issue. It is very wide and vast. For instance, just to it's not something just that we speak in elite spaces, but it has very much implications at the grassroots level. And for instance, India shares several transboundary rivers with our neighbors. So whether it's the Brahma, Ganga, Teesta with Bangladesh, or whether it is the Kabul Basin, or whether it's the Indus Basin with Pakistan, or whether it is the Kosi, Mahakali, or the Gandak rivers with Nepal. So we have natural resources are across, spatially located across national boundaries, and climate change very much affects say water bodies or forests, and they have certain kinds of biodiverse regions such as the Sundarbans. They are transnational and transboundary issues. Therefore, we'll have to tackle it with a multilateral perspective and through global cooperation and dialogue. It cannot be done by just one nation. So feminist foreign policies, how are these policies made, and how does international relationships kind of get mediated in the process. I'm turning off my video because of internet bandwidth, just so that the slides can be more prominent without any problems. So in the context of, so therefore, within this foreign policy, we want to locate gender, and we want to locate it within the framework of rights, human rights, social and environmental justice, and gender justice. So the recently concluded G20 Delhi Declaration, the last aspects of the declaration was about gender inclusion in climate action, and it is welcome, but we have to look at the challenges also. There are several canonical global texts, whether it's the Sustainable Development Goals, whether it is the Paris Climate Accord. All of these canonical global texts have provisions for gender. And in the Indian context, you have the Prime Minister's 10-point agenda for which also includes the need to integrate a gender consciousness into climate thinking and climate thought. So why do we need to integrate a gender consciousness within climate thought is simply looking at the questions of climate justice. The people who are least likely to contribute to climate change are the most likely to be affected by climate change. Okay, and climate change is not gender neutral. There is disproportionate burden on women, gender minorities, sexual minorities, transgender, non-binary communities, intersex persons. So across the gender spectrum, the disproportionate vulnerabilities is, climate change impacts different identities differently, and these are the groups least likely to contribute to climate change, least likely to be able to afford energy, or least likely to be able to get on a plane and fly across the globe. So the least carbon footprint, but they are the ones who are most likely to be affected by climate change. So there are ethical dimensions, and one has to therefore frame it as a legal and a political issue beyond the scope of just one nation, but as a multilateral, dialogic, globally involving praxis. So justice outcomes, it's not only about reduction in greenhouse gases, but also one has to go and look at sustainable livelihood creation and compensation, because there is, it's not enough to just say these are polluting livelihoods, so these are polluting occupations, but what do those communities, what alternatives are available to them? In the last G20, the Brisbane Goal was introduced, and the Brisbane Goal stated that we need to bridge the gender gap in the workforce, and by 2025 bring 100 million more women globally into the labor market. And so we're still behind on some of these goals, and these are very much, I'll link it to why, I'll talk about why these aspects are important in a climate change or a climate. It's no longer about climate change. I think we have to talk about it as climatic crises. One of the reasons is that climate change has a great impact on certain sections of the population, especially those most reliant on certain kinds of natural resources. They have the least capacity and with their current means to respond to natural hazards themselves, droughts, landslides, floods, hurricanes. And it is a gendered phenomenon, because there is women are the poorest of the poor from the economic sense. There is a feminization of poverty, and they are going to be greatest burdens and impacts of climate change will be on women. And there is also, on the other side, unequal participation in decision-making processes and the labor market to be able to cope with and respond to the crises that affects them. So this is a brief framework that we had created, along with one of my senior colleagues and professors in the department, Professor Janki Andaria. We created this framework together. How do you look at the gender development and climate change? So current developmental process, we have a very extractive relationship with the environment, owing to unsustainable uses of natural resources, certain forms of urbanization, certain forms of industrialization that are great pollutants, great polluters. And these anthropogenic activity on the environment brings about climate change. In what way? By rising sea levels, decreased rainfall, agricultural shortfalls, floods, droughts, glacial lake melting, global warming, and forest fires, a range of natural and climatic changes over a period of time owing to our unsustainable ways of living and modernist pursuit of development. And these have certain kinds of impact. It undermines poor livelihoods. It brings about distress migration, displacement, food security, and women and gender minorities are the most marginalized, and their labor is concentrated in the informal sector, which is characterized by lack of protective legislations. There might be a few, but they are insufficient. Social security. So these impacts are gendered, because who is the poorest of the poor, who fall outside formal labor economy, who is most dependent on the natural environment for subsistence, who are the people who face the burdens of family and market and the neoliberal state and the welfare reductions and dilutions, and what are the social and political barriers. And this is not just within a national context, but it has to be looked as a global and a transnational context. And we also have very weak institutional arrangements. The simple thing is we don't have gender disaggregated data. So the next census is yet to come, and the gender needs get subsumed under the household, and development policies don't reach intended beneficiaries. So there is a major link between the way in which climate change is produced, caused through pursuit of certain kinds of developmental models, and its impact on different genders. So we also have the social cultural foundation of vulnerability. See, within the disaster and climate studies, we're very much concerned about who is vulnerable. And these are some figures I've put up on the left. But what I want to actually talk about is, if there is a 1 to 3 degrees centigrade rise in temperatures, what is going to happen? Because all your global policies today talk about keeping temperature, net zero, and bringing about temperature reduction, or keeping it at 2 degrees. But if there is a 1 to 3 degree rise, one is you will have increase in sea level rise and other forms of natural disasters. There'll also be less rainfall, flooding, implications for food production and agricultural shortfalls. Who is going to experience the brunt of this? Primarily the women and the most marginalized groups that are concentrated in the informal sector, with very less access to formal markets, formal credit, formal social protection structures. So there is also a gender division of labor. There's an increased burden on women for water and fuel collection. They have to travel longer distances, household water management, water procurement, managing food, managing kitchen garden, livestock handling. And these are also embedded in the context of caste and landlessness and so on, because women own less than 5% of land in their own names, and the landless agricultural laborers are primarily the lower castes. So even a 1 to 3 degrees centigrade rise in temperature is going to have deep socio-economic vulnerability. So we have seen that, therefore, disaster and climate risk, climate change brings about extreme weather events, whether it is flooding, droughts, heat waves, and they cannot be mitigated in a gender blind or a gender neutral manner, right? So, and post disasters as well. I mean, there's restricted access to rescue, relief, compensation. Now we are talking about including them in policy, talking about gender within the arena of policy making, but there is a lot of literature and there's a lot of studies on how rescue relief mechanisms don't reach women because various social and cultural barriers. So this is some of the, when you're talking about foreign policy, we are looking at some of the canonical global texts, the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the Sustainable Development Goals. So this little diagram sort of shows how the different canonical global texts, the foreign policies today, we have to include G20, the declarations as well in this, how they bring about the, they all have gender provisions, but there is somewhere there is a problem in the implementation, because only 12% of the SDGs have been achieved, and we are in 2023. 2030 is the sort of deadline to achieve the SDGs, and only 12% reports have just come and saying only 12% we're not on track really with the SDGs. And there are so many other aspects of how each of these policies align at the global level, but we must recognize climate change as a driver of various forms of risk. And there's some studies that say that, you know, environmental refugees or climate refugees as a new category is upcoming in the context of various extreme events. So this is in Pakistan, and women are extremely vulnerable in the post-disaster scenario with the increase in trafficking, or 70% of those displaced in a certain area in Pakistan post the floods were women. And therefore, what does a feminist framework for climate action even does it even look like? How am I doing on time, ma'am? Can I take another 2 minutes?
Yeah,
Okay.
please go ahead.
Yeah. So the feminist framework for climate action is first to recognize that women, gender minorities, sexual minorities, and the identities across the gender spectrum are they're not homogeneous groups. There is a lot of diversity, a lot of heterogeneity, and so it cannot be an add and stir approach where we just bring in gender into the discussion and start talking about gender as though it is one category. One has to look at these several nuances of within the identity. And decision making, Professor Vibhuti also spoke about it in her opening remarks, that there has to be inclusive decision making where women and then gender diverse individuals are integrated into decentralized forms of governance. The Grama Panchayat in the Indian context, in the Gram Sabhas, can be extended to to become climate assemblies in a way, and to see how the local, local issues can be brought from a climate change lens to these climate assemblies. It's just a thought to see how we can extend perhaps the functioning of the Panchayati Raj systems at the grassroots levels. And we must address the fact that climate-related disasters, there is a pattern of violence that always manifests whenever there is a natural disaster, which is fueled by an extreme weather event coming from the climate change perspective. And whether it is trafficking or whether it is rape in shelter homes, there is a huge gender-based violence which often gets neglected or invisibilized while speaking about climate change, because in such calamitous conditions, women often lose, quote unquote, the men. They're separated from the male members in the household, and or they become orphaned and so on, and they are susceptible to a lot of violence. We saw this in the COVID era as well, where there was an increase in gender-based violence and domestic violence. And it is so we cannot, this is an invisible and neglected area within the climate discourse, but that we must look at. And decision making has to also look at resource distribution and redistribution of resources, access to minor forest produce, access to water, access to agricultural subsidies. Women are not irrigators, access to being able to make irrigation decisions. These are some of the small and marginal farmers who are, women do a lot of work on the farm, though, so they are excluded from irrigation decisions and so on. So all of this is, so in order to bring about and promote a gender responsive climate policy, we need gender responsive budgeting within the climate financing scenario. There has to be gender responsive budgeting. And also, in order to bring about policy shifts and changes, we require disaggregated data, right? And so all of this will lead to what we are calling sustainable development. And you look at women not just as victims of climate change, but those they can be seen as leaders, innovators, and decision making in environmental initiatives, because there are a lot of grassroots level work, especially with women in the environment, are very much gendered in nature. So these are the sustainable development goals, where which is 5, which is gender equality. and they cut across several aspects which are important for climate change, which is consumption patterns, which is SDG 12. Then there is SDG 17, that is meeting resources and partnerships. Then water, SDG 6 is water, energy 7. So it's a cross-cutting theme across several goals which cannot be ignored. And therefore, I want to end on this note that yes, foreign policy has to have some bureaucratic will and has to be translated and implemented at the grassroots level. It cannot just be relegated to the academic and the bureaucratic level. There has to be certain kind of translation, operationalization. So I will stop at this point, and we will over to you, Professor Vibhuti. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Lavanya, for giving such a comprehensive view of the whole subject of climate change. And you also brought out the very important that why it is a transnational issue. We need to have multilateral perspective, and there are ethical dimensions also you have brought in. Who creates the anthropogenic calamities and who is paying the price of it? A need for gender disaggregated data and the political will and the role of the local level organizations such as the Panchayati Raj institution in the Indian context. I think in every local, urban and rural, local self-government bodies, I think that's very important concern. The only question that I have, and I think that can be taken, all the questions we will take at the end, because there are two questions in the question box. So now can we move to second speaker, our veteran feminist, Ms. Farida Akhtar.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your remarks, and thank you, Lavanya, ma'am, for such an enriching start. I would now like to invite Dr. Farida Akhtar, ma'am, to take
Just a request from the participants. Can you share your PPT on the chat box? Lavanya, they are asking for your PPT. I have shared the book on the PPT. You can download it from the chat box. Yeah. Yes, Farida, please.
Okay, thank you very much, for inviting me to this very important, discussion on feminist foreign policy and climate change. But in the beginning, I want to say that I lost my mother 1 week ago on 11th September. So I want to dedicate my talk to Anwara Begum. Her name is Anwara Begum. And so that I pay some respect to her, because she was a great supporter of our work. And, I would go, thank you, Lavanya, that you have given a very good background of climate disasters and everything, which is common to us as well. But I would like to take, a bit critical or skeptical view of feminist foreign policy, because it originated, not because it originated in the Western countries, but because I have seen that the issues they have raised so far were, like, of course, gender equality, gender injustice and everything, but it was more Eurocentric. And, so we found that when Mexico joined in, after Sweden started it, and when Mexico joined in, then it talked about like all the other issues like structural gender differences, inequalities, working towards a more just and prosperous society. So these are issues that may not be needed in the Western countries, but in our context, it is very important. Another thing that I wanted to raise was, in 1974, the Bucharest conference was held in Romania, and it was about population policy. And then in that meeting, they realized that unless you involve women into development, works, the population control policy will not be successful. So then they included women in the name of women and development, women in development. All these things came later, but women became the means to achieve population control goals. So I just wanted to raise that issue because it's not only just bringing more women into the policy, climate policy making bodies, but also what issues we are bringing in, how we are, like Labunno said very nicely, and also Vibhuti said very nicely, that not to take women as victims only, of climate change. They are in fact, they have to challenge these anthropogenic causes and the corporate solutions that are given to us. So this is one of the things that when I was preparing for this meeting, I went through some of the things, and I found that they do recognize the disproportionate impact of climate change on women. There is no doubt about it, and it's very true. And also feminist foreign policy does acknowledge that. But I think before feminist foreign policy was introduced in 2014 by Margot of Sweden, Christina Figueres, who was UN climate chief, who was there in 2010 to 2016, and also Mary Robinson, who was ex-Irish foreign prime minister and also human rights commissioner. They recognized this issue when they were in the meetings. As Christina said many times, that more often than not, we are in a minority. Even though she was the chief, she recognized that quite often I am the only woman in the room. That's not right. So she definitely felt the difference in taking policies on climate change, because that is cross-border. So whatever decision is taken in United States or in UK, it affects us all. If they don't reduce carbon emissions, it affects us. So there are a lot of things that we need to tell them. But Christina just felt that it was the lacking was there. Like WIDO has done one statistics, which is very interesting, that women's underrepresentation in the UN climate decision-making bodies, particularly on the high-level committees, delivering climate action, which was less than 25% seats. And just 29% of the 5,090 delegates at the Doha conference in 2012 were female. So, but in the other civil society forums, we see more women, more active women, but in the official groups, they are not there. In fact, Mary Robinson also was very upset that there was nothing about human rights and nothing about gender. So at the UN level, it is really gender, it's just a rhetoric they talk about, and it's very alarming, or I'm a bit worried that the present UN climate chief is the former Grenada minister, Simon Still. So anyway, it's a man, that is not the main question, but the problem is his background seems to be more in technology than in real issues of people. He was in senior positions in a number of industry leading companies like Silicon Valley-based technology, up to corporations like Nokia and GSC. So I think these all matter to us, in the end. So this is what I really wanted to mention as a global issue, because it affects us. And then, but it was also true as Mary Robinson puts it, that as she fought to bring more women into the policy bodies. So when there were more indigenous women who spoke out, the policymakers were just realizing that, oh, something else is there that is happening and they have to look at that. So bringing more real women, those who are sufferers, I think made a difference. UNFCCC held on March 8th, they celebrated March 8th this year. And for them, the main compelling reasons are to engage women to tackling climate change with diverse experience and all this and that, and gender action plan under UNFCCC calls for women's full, equal and meaningful participation in the international climate processes. I'm just a bit concerned that it should not, again, I'm saying that when UNFCCC talks about bringing more women or making women work on climate actions, that women should not become the means again to other goals, so that is, I think we have a role to play, that what we want, and we also want to challenge that the GHG emitters, the CO2 emitters must stop carbon emissions immediately, and that, why the Conference of the Parties of the UNFCCC are failing without any commitment of carbon emissions. Why the developed countries, here my question is that feminist foreign policies adopted in the countries, like Sweden, Netherlands, Germany, do they question these things at the UNFCCC meetings? So this is what is a question that I would like to raise. And structure, so like my main message is like feminist foreign climate policy should be to challenge the male and arrogant attitude of the developed nations who are not reducing carbon emissions, and also offer false solutions. This is one thing that Professor Bibhuti, I want to, reiterate that they are now talking about false solutions. They talk about nature-based solutions as if those are in favor of the people. So nature-based solutions are not all nature-based. They talk about net zero, but net zero is not zero. It is just net zero. That means they will continue to emit carbon and also do something like plant some trees, or on the one hand, they will continue to deforest Amazon and also in our countries, but they will do on their own way. So this is what I really want to say, but in a way, feminist foreign climate policy should have to acknowledge the existence of real solution, not the false solution, that the communities in the global south, like our indigenous people, peasants, fishers, and the pastoralists, the communities have been struggling against extractive projects and the impacts of climate change. Women are defenders within their communities and are guardians of the world's remaining biodiversity. Women are also the ones who feed the world. And Preeti has visited our place, and our farmers are really working on climate resistant varieties of seeds, and they are really addressing the floods and drought conditions with their own knowledge and their practices. And then also the forest management and other things, that indigenous people, it is their right to have the access to foreign, the forest. So they talk about soil carbon offsets, and so-called offsets are nothing but an excuse for big emitters to continue business as usual. So we cannot be naive if they just come up and really involve women in all this. Lastly, I would like to say that on June 5th this year, Vandana Shiva and all others, we are in a network called Diverse Women for Diversity. In March, we got together to adopt an eco-feminist manifesto, which I can share with you, which was, launched in Rome on 5th of June. And the manifesto clearly denounces all industrial and false solutions towards food, although the world is being increasingly controlled by surveillance capitalism and the financialization of life forms. The Diverse Women for Diversity does not accept any form of gene editing and genetic engineering in crops and animals. These are fake foods created for corporate profits. Diverse Women for Diversity calls for an end to contamination, distortions, and colonization of our foods. So the diverse TWD calls for the imperative transition into local, biodiverse, ecological systems that work in harmony with nature. It declares we need diversity in food systems, diversity in seeds, diversity in economies, our culture and language diversity, and the diversity of our struggles connects us all. I think, these are all connected and these are all necessary for a feminist climate policy. And that's all I have to say at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farida, for a very important great signals that you have shown over the discourses on climate change, but you ended with an optimistic note of Diverse Women for Diversity. I was recently in Bali, and there were only conference of Asia Pacific youth from indigenous community. And I think that also was very hope generating, how they are fighting for the diversity and also connecting it to the climate issues. Yeah, in the midst of so many hopeless developments, we see the ray of hope in this kind of efforts at the ground level. Thank you very much. Yes. Now over to Ms. Preeti Darukar.
Thank you, ma'am, for your remarks. And now I would like to invite Preeti ma'am. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. It is such an honor to be on this panel with such esteemed experts. Vibhuti ji, thank you so much. And Arjun ji, thank you for organizing this and inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. Before I make my intervention, I just wanted to share, I am going to talk about from a Global South feminist. And as I was introduced as a founder and a global coordinator for BRICS Feminist Watch. BRICS Feminist Watch is a Global South feminist alliance. We particularly work across Global South countries with feminists in bringing a very South-based analysis and agenda to a highest level of policy making. By our very we of course channel or question the Western or the North-based domination, not just by country, but also in our feminist circle. And therefore, we have a very different or a more grounded South perspective in global policy spaces. So just to start with, I want to appreciate also all that was shared before me. Vibhuti ji, thank you so much for reminding us of the strength, robust power of our global feminist movements, right from 1985 with Nairobi coming to Beijing, and how solidarity and how common agendas in those days without fax or emails without emails, actually, fax existed without mobile and all, we were able to accomplish. But that was the power of the women's global movement, should not be confused with feminist foreign policy. What we achieved was women's or feminist movement globally. That solidarity was established. The linkages, connections, all those are very important, and that was made. I also want to appreciate what Lavanya so exquisitely and in depth shared with us, the need for bringing gender dimensions and feminist analysis in the whole climate and locating women's leadership in decision making as well as solution. Absolutely, I think, Lavanya, no one will disagree with that. But the question is feminist foreign policy. And of course, my dear friend Farida, we go back many years, and it's always a pleasure to hear her knowledge, expertise, and how she works so tirelessly with such commitment with women farmers on the ground. So it's a pleasure. And Farida ji, and I know Saida is also in the audience, my big hug to you. And I do want to send my condolences for your immense loss. My love, my dear. Okay, so, you know, we know, as Vibhuti ji shared, that few countries now have developed a feminist foreign policy. And when you hear, like, I identify myself as a feminist, and when I hear, somehow you feel, I felt very glad, like, okay, there is some very promising trends and hope to see these feminist foreign policies based on national, internal conversation, needs, strategy. And so I do want to congratulate all the countries who have gone through that and maybe have accomplished that. And when I first heard as feminist foreign policy, I was totally, I would say, ooh la la, I was totally seduced by it as a feminist, right? What more can you ask? Like, countries are talking about feminist foreign policy. I'm still very interested in the idea how gender is much more integrated in diplomatic activities of a country. As a Global South feminist, my interventions today, like, I know the past speakers have dealt very extensively and beautifully in the whole climate justice. I will touch on that in the second part of my presentation, but I first want to unpack this whole thing about feminist foreign policy. So I want to make my interventions today coming from Global South, and I identify myself as a decolonial feminist. So the greatest event in world history in the 20th century is decolonization. Although countries achieved independence from their past colonizers, the process of colonization continues to be an ongoing process, and this has both opportunities as well as challenges. And the discussions around feminist foreign policy is very much located in this. There are two components to the feminist foreign policy. One is the actual process. How does a country actually gets to having a feminist foreign policy? And the second is, what is the content of this policy? How does the country decide what its feminist foreign policy should be? Now, when a few months ago, I was on a panel, similar kind of a webinar, where the Swedish foreign minister, former minister, shared that, of course, Sweden was the first country in 2014 to develop a feminist foreign policy. However, last year, I think with the change in government, they have retrieved it. They don't no longer have a feminist foreign policy. So it's a very interesting development. So she shared on this webinar that the conversations to actually have a feminist foreign policy started in the early 80s or late 70s. That is 1970, 40 years ago. It took Sweden 40 years of various stakeholders' discussion, consultation, and extensive dialogues at country level, whether it should be called foreign policy, whether it should be feminist, what should be the content of it, before they reached the stage in 2014 where there was consensus, there was, after much debate and dialogue, it was agreed and a feminist foreign policy was put forward. This national process is absolutely crucial. It is not just crucial for feminist foreign policy, but as we always question our government, where magically overnight the parliament passes a policy and we say, where was the national conversation? No one knew about it. So if we demand, and a demand for feminist foreign policy, should come from the country, should come from the women's movement within the country. It should be homegrown. It should not be imposed from outside. However trendy, seductive, sexy it might be, how much well it might be funded, this has to be a homegrown exercise, the way Sweden shared it, that it was a totally homegrown conversation. And then they reached the thing that Sweden, the country, whatever their parameters, how they identified themselves as, they needed something called feminist foreign policy. Hence, they went forward on it. So what is the impact of these some Western North countries now adopting feminist foreign policy? So there are, like, yes, there's Mexico, as Farida ji shared, there's Mexico, Chile. I think there's one more. Is it Libya? There are 3 North countries have developed a feminist foreign policy. This is now being pushed on other countries. In India, it's heavily pushed by Europe through funding as a good thing, that all countries now should have a feminacy. We in the West, we North people have got it. So people in the South, you guys should also have this. In India, for example, there is heavy funding by European funders, especially Germans, around feminist foreign policy related work, which includes research, dialogue, events, roundtable. Satyam shared the book and talked about it. I'm sure German and European funders were behind it. And the publication comes out as a knowledge piece. As a decolonial feminist, this has the same colonial mindset. Even after territorial freedom, there continues still to be this kind of imposition of universal narrative, a global linear thinking based on westernization that continues to unfortunately colonize our mind. This form of colonization is used to legitimize Western knowledge through artificial universalization. We've gotten it in our countries here, so it's a good thing. If you don't have it, that means you're backward, you're not doing the right thing. You are not talking about women's rights and gender and women's empowerment. And so you need to develop it. The work in India around feminist foreign policy, of course, is funded by Europe and is quite strategically presented as a local initiative, and the Eurocentric origins are concealed. This also is artificial positioning, a particular kind of reasoning, knowledge, epistemology, and is therefore silencing local realities, context, and narratives. This is not a homegrown demand. It is being imposed from outside very strategically, and we need to be mindful of it. Germany in March got feminist foreign policy. Of course, no, they got it in, I think, 2 years ago, but in March, they adopted the guidelines. And I would really encourage you to read what the woman minister from Germany in its introduction to the guidelines talks about. It mentions how the Ukraine, due to the Ukraine war, the women in Ukraine, the plight of Ukraine, women in Ukraine, then she talks about Iranian women and the kind of situation they are. Haven't we had enough of this? Do we want Western countries to come and save us and talk about their foreign policy as we poor thing, and please not come and save? I think the colonial period is over, and we need to send a very strong message that we really don't, no one in the South needs saving. We are very capable of dealing with our issues. And so this colonial mindset has a racist, has a patronizing tone to it, and it positions the West as the do-gooder, and it positions the South as the problems that need to be taken care of. So why is this artificial universalization of feminist foreign policy a problem? What these efforts are also doing indirectly is creating what is acceptable as a good gender equality indicator. So if a country has a feminist foreign policy, that means you're a good country. Does that mean all that we talk about and all that we as women leaders and feminist leaders, we work and we do right from the ground level to policy level, all that is meaningless? There was such good analysis that was shared just by my panelists before me. Where is all this coming from? This is all great feminist work. There is also a homogenization process. That means that gender equality component in a country's foreign policy should only come as feminist foreign policy. Does this mean like, okay, the gender aspect and inclusion of feminist analysis in climate justice conversation is important, but why does it have to come as a feminist foreign policy? It is part of our climate justice policy. It is part of everything that the country does. It should be part of all our other policies. What is this, that why this all of a sudden, this has to be part of like what is called a feminist foreign policy? This also renders national components approaches to gender equality within a country's foreign policy as inadequate and invisible. So what I've seen is all the work, like I have not read your book, so please forgive me if I overly generalize it. But so far what I've seen in terms of the knowledge produced around feminist foreign policy in Indian context is it shows how the other countries, what are the content in their foreign policy, and how India doesn't have all this. So India is lacking and India needs to do all this in order to. So all the countries have strived to then in this kind of approach, what it does is that all the countries have to strive to rise to a standard that is set by the West. It also reiterates that West knows the best. And what West does, it good for all. And so we all should be doing it. So West, many countries have adopted the foreign policy, feminist foreign policy. Oh, wow. As I said, I was seduced by it. I felt, oh, wow. But then you step back and you think, is it relevant in our context? What does it mean? And does it really mean that we in our countries don't talk about women's equality or empowerment, or we only need to talk about all these things the way the West is framing it? Okay, then let's look at all the countries that have developed feminist foreign policy. Sweden, Germany, Canada, all the North I'm counting, Luxembourg, France, Spain, Netherlands. Have they become better countries? And how do the feminists of these countries feel when in 2020, when the world faced the worst crisis? I'm talking about the COVID-19. European countries and member of the European Union voted against trip waivers for vaccine denying millions of people around the world this life-saving drug. These countries with feminist foreign policy stood with pharma companies and stood for corporate profits. Yet these countries are self-proclaimed as humanitarian, human rights, gender equality countries, and they are the ones who have the standard. Can we ask then from Global South, because these countries fail to save millions and millions of people affected by COVID, can we ask these countries now to be downgraded from their self-proclaimed humanitarian status? Also, it is important now with the Ukraine war going on and to see what the position is. So, of course, Sweden has talked about it wants to join NATO membership. There are many other countries who have feminist foreign policy who also talk about NATO expansion, militarization. Germany, for example, is the 4th largest weapon producer in the world. Is this feminist approach? Shouldn't a feminist approach to foreign policy, if as a feminist, I might be naive, I might be very idealistic, but I would say as feminists, I would think human-centric approach would be very much part of feminist foreign policy. And it would, of course, focus on dismantling global economic political structures that reproduce gender inequality, as well as other forms of exclusion, discrimination, injustice. Do you see any of these countries doing that? Can they really claim that they have now feminist foreign policy and so they can talk about gender equality? Or are they actually, through their foreign policy, militarization, whatever else we can talk about, actually perpetuating inequality in the world? As feminists, we are also very strong and skeptical towards military solution, right? Like we stand against all forms of violence and security challenges. We always prioritize human rights, civil society engagement, which will include demilitarization, multilateralism, diplomatic engagement. Now, do any of these countries which have developed feminist foreign policy and proclaim now let's ask all the other countries to have this, are these really our role models? Are these really countries standing behind feminist principles? So India doesn't have feminist foreign policy so far, and the discussions, like, have been in very elite circle. I've been part of some, and, of course, it is being funded by outside. It's not a local women's movement conversation that has homegrown, talking to various stakeholders and emerge. And so it is a foreign implant, and we need to just raise our antenna to that. I would even go forward and say, this is what coloniality looks like. Now let's look at, okay, these countries are talking about feminist foreign policy. We have at least 5-6 European countries there. Then why is it that only 1% of total global aid goes to women's rights? Why has this number not changed, where so many countries from the developed world who are major donors of development aid? So what is this feminist and gender equality? They are not neither being actually promoting gender equality if that 1% hasn't changed over the years. This is not just in BRICS Feminist Watch. These are similar sentiments shared by African feminists, Latin American. As South feminists, we really feel that it is something for us to be mindful of. So what does India have then? So if we look at it in 2022, that is last year, during our independence speech, the Prime Minister of, this is of course called Amrit Kal, which is the 25-year period from 75th anniversary of India's independence to the centenary celebration. The 25 years is called Amrit Kal. And in this period, India has set a goal for itself that it will totally decolonize by itself. When 2047 comes, when India will celebrate 100 years of its independence, India would be totally decolonized. It's not a goal for an individual. This is a goal which has been given to the country. And this is the driving force within India in all our thinking, discussions, deliberations, strategic intervention. The decolonial approach is very much become our collective thinking in a way. We are critical about it. We are not accepting everything that is thrown at us, but we are having very interesting conversations there. For example, India in its G20 presidency this year, the maxim for G20 was Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which literally means whole world is one family. It further refers to India's advocacy, which was the, the tagline, one earth, one family, one future. And this is, of course, mentioned, like not to bring out our Hindu scriptures, but it comes from the Maha Upanishad. Additionally, how does the concept of foreign as a foreign policy relate to the notion of one world family, which means that there is nothing foreign? The collective consciousness of our land believes that the whole universe, which we call Brahman, is within ourselves. The same energy that is within me is the same energy which is in everyone else, which is in the plants, flower, it's in the table, chair, it's in everything, is the same consciousness that exists in each one of us. And that is the only truth. And whatever is outside is an illusion or a Maya. And so there is a oneness to this universal truth that our collective consciousness of this land believes. And hence, in this collective Indian consciousness, there is nothing foreign or other. During COVID crisis, for example, like I gave you the example where the European countries with the wonderful feminist foreign policy stood on the vaccine distribution. India was the pharmacy to the world. When all Western countries with feminists stood with pharmaceutical companies for their profit and said no to trip waiver, India not only vaccinated its 1.4 billion population, but it's also provided vaccine and critical drugs free of cost to 150 countries. Now let's look at the word feminism or feminist. Like I would love it. I identify very openly as a feminist and I believe in feminist policy, feminism. It's very much part of my political thinking, but it's not part of our social fabric or our policy discussion. That doesn't mean India doesn't have frameworks of gender equality or women's empowerment. It doesn't mean that if we talk about feminist or feminism that gender equality and women's empowerment can be. It comes in a different context, reality, language. And it doesn't mean that we don't have our problems also. There are enough problems. There's no way. What I'm saying is that we don't have issues of inequality, discrimination, and some of the horrific situations, not to even forget the situation that is happening in Manipur, the violence, or women wrestlers. So all that, I'm not negating that, but that doesn't mean that in our policy framework, we do not have concepts of gender equality, women's empowerment, etc. I also want to, I know Lavinia talked about this little bit. I want to go a little further in this, which is women-led development, which is one of the key themes of G20, was one of the key themes, overarching cross-cutting themes in G20. So this was not a theme for Women 20 or a gender working group, but India wanted to change the narrative and made women-led development as an overarching theme for G20 under its presidency. Now, under women-led development, women are not just beneficiaries of development. Instead, they set the agenda for development and are key to achieve the SDG goals as leaders and equal participants. The concept as such taps into a long-established approach in development theory, which calls for inclusion of women in development, planning and decision. So are women in development, that whole theory analysis, like you can trace, I'm sure the academic experts on this panel or in this who are there today, no, it goes back to 30, 40 years, how this whole concept of women in development have unfolded, and how today when we look at women-led development, it has some of the same key building blocks or principles that we as feminists have been talking about, which is recognizing, going beyond looking at women as just beneficiary, but recognizing women's leadership, inclusion of women in decision making and participation, and recognizing that a woman comes in with skills and knowledge and is not just a passive welfare receiver. Okay, now let's quickly look at G20 declaration, and particularly look at what this approach, what I want to highlight is that women-led development, not feminist foreign policy, is India's, what would I say, policy framework on gender equality, which India should put all its muscle, might, and strength, and export it as in all its diplomatic processes and all. It resonates with our narrative. It came from India. There were many conversations around it. All stakeholders participated in, and we have just started unpacking, building a framework. And I think we should own it and stay with it and claim it and really build it as a framework that works for us and is not imposed from outside. So let's look at the G20 declaration. So we got many, because women-led development was an overarching theme. So G20 affirms that gender equality is of fundamental importance, and investing in empowerment of women and girls has a multiplier effect, right? It also encourages, G20 encourages women-led development and remains committed to enhancing women's full, equal, effective, meaningful participation as decision maker for addressing global challenges, inclusively in contributing as active participants in all spheres of society, across all sectors, at all levels of economy, which is not only crucial for achieving gender, but also for contributing to global GDP growth. This we got from India's G20 presidency under women-led development. It also talks about to promote investment in availability, accessibility. Now, of course, we recognize that one of the major obstacles for women's empowerment is the unequal burden of care, unpaid work and care responsibility. So this declaration talks about available, accessible, affordable social infrastructure to address the unequal distribution of paid and unpaid care domestic work, So it's also distribution. You look at it, how much we have achieved, and it has all come from our local conversations, debates, discussion, which have happened in the last 10 months, 11 months, and building from all the years of work that has happened in this country, and bringing that forward. G20 also talks about, which is really like eliminate gender stereotypes and biases and change norms, attitudes, behavior that perpetuate gender inequality. So if you ask, like as feminists, we know this is where patriarchy is, this is where the root cause of discrimination inequality is. And to get such a important G20 declaration to recognize that, it's a big achievement. It doesn't mean anything has changed on the ground. You still need to do the work and put pressure to get it implemented. But the fact that it got into the declaration itself is some kind of a hope it gives. It also opens up that we need to do additional work. Now, under climate justice and women, now this is what, of course, Lavanya and others, they talked about it. And I just want to take you a little deeper into what we got in the G20 declaration. Acknowledging the disproportionate impact of climate change, biodiversity loss, desertification, and pollution on all women and girls, accelerating climate action must have gender equality at its core. Can we ask, of course, we can strengthen it further, but this we got in G20. G20 will support increased women's participation, partnership decision-making, leadership in climate change mitigation and adaptation, and disaster risk reduction strategies, and policy framework on environmental issues. This is women's leadership, participation in decision-making in climate change. How useful is that particular point that we got in G20 declaration? It further talks about support of gender responsive and environment resilient solution, including water, sanitation, and hygiene. And it talks about women's role in all the climate change processes. The second thing I wanted to highlight as a framework, I hope I'm okay on time, if I may just take a couple more minutes to put forward.
Yeah,
is that okay?
Yeah.
Is the concept of lifestyle for environment. This was introduced by our Prime Minister at COP26 in Glasgow in 2021 as an international mass movement towards mindful and deliberate utilization instead of mindless and destructive consumption to protect and preserve the environment. Now, life has, of course, an individual and collective duty in everyone to live a life that is in tune with the earth and that doesn't harm it. Now, this again resonates very much with indigenous culture, rural community, with most of the global South lifestyle. It indirectly also critiques the Western patterns of consumption and the over exploitation of nature, and where the actual pollution and destruction of climate actually happens. The concept of life is, of course, drawn from Indian indigenous practices globally and also has references to the scriptures or text from this region. There are some great examples also of decolonial approach in policy in Indian, if you look at it, what we got, okay, let's just look at what does this life give us in the G20 declaration. It talks about three main pillars. It refers to, there was a high level principle, there were G20 high level principles on life which were adopted, and the G20 declaration totally stands by these high level principles. It has 3 key pillars and then it illustrates 9 principles. I would encourage you to definitely go and check them out. The 3 key pillars it talks about is that G20 commits to robust collective action that will enable the world for this whole, the production consumption pattern and mainstream lifestyle for sustainable development. The second pillar is it supports, I'm sorry, I got confused. So robust collective action is first pillar. Second is that it should question the production and consumption pattern should be sustainable. It should not be exploitative. And the third is that there should be a creation of an enabling policy environment that is sustainable and demands climate action.
So based on these 3 pillars, there are 9 principles that are developed. I would encourage you to definitely go and check them out. They are all there on the G20 website. Now, what India is doing is very deliberately, strategically, is drawing from a collective consciousness knowledge of its culture, history, from what is the tradition, culture, patterns, knowledge, skill of this land, and developing frameworks, paradigms, and policy briefs that are relevant to our context. And then that is being made, and it has been brought into the G20, which is, of course, a global this thing. And we hope it gets like some of these things that have come forward very much resonates with our communities, women on the ground. And that becomes very important also. So it is what we got on paper. We still need to see how it gets implemented, or whether India will just look at this as an event. And so the event is over, so everything can be packed up and put on shelf and moving on with life. So we just want to make sure that their commitment to women-led development and what they have said under climate justice on including women is carried forward. So it's also important for us to look at, and I will put it forward, maybe others can also answer, that what makes then a policy feminist? And it's important for us to reflect and think about it. And can we come up with a framework which is not influenced by Western analysis and Western framework of gender empowerment or gender equality and women's empowerment, but it's very much grounded in our reality. So for example, like, you know, if I was talking about the German minister in the introduction for the guidelines, and they talk about gender equality or equality between man and woman. Now, in our parts of the world, and even I would say, I would elaborate even to say that in global south, in many cultures, the gender roles were very specific, and women in general, if you look at pre-colonial period, women in general did not aspire to behave like men, and they didn't feel disempowered, or they didn't feel in order to achieve their freedom or in order to be empowered, they need to behave like men. This is a binary category that was brought into our mindset and thinking from a colonial perspective, that there is man, there's a woman. Our societies didn't work in these binary fashion. And you will, of course, Farida is there, will talk about the role of, for example, women in seed conservation in agriculture community. And these roles provided women a status and a recognition. And they never felt like, you know, it was in a way, they didn't feel that, okay, only if I plow the land, I need to be. There was some kind of, it doesn't mean like, I know I'm getting into a bit kind of complicated area, and I hope I don't get into trouble with other feminist sisters on the call. But I hope you understand that we really need to unpack what all these things mean from a decolonial lens and claim it for ourselves and see beyond that. So I hope I'm going to stop there. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Preeti, for unpacking the conspiracy theories around feminist foreign policy. Right from the very beginning, from 1972 till we can say 2000, feminist movement all over the world, there was so much of faith and trust. Now, in today's polarized world, I think the question has a lot of doubts are there. And I think you have genuinely said, what did the feminists from advanced countries or the North do when such a major pandemic was this thing, and why didn't they prevail upon the multinational pharma industry? That are really genuinely very important concern. But at the same time, we should also be aware that when we talk about the indigenous approach, it should not result in criminalization and brutalization of religious minorities, which is happening in so many countries in Asia. That is one thing. Secondly, when we talk about equality, equality development peace was a slogan of the 1975 International Women's Year, as well as International Women's Decade 75 to 85. And we understood it as an equality of opportunity, equality of treatment and equality of rewards for the contribution women are making. So from that, it was that time also, it was never equality with what men are doing. If men are indulging in war, we don't want to indulge in war. Okay. So that is there. And I think your last point, very important. And even Faridaji also said the role of women in the subsistence economy of Asia, Africa, Latin America, I think extremely important, and how the TNCs and multinational corporations, transnational corporations, zombie capitalism is doing major destruction of Mother Earth and also women, large majority of marginalized community. So very well taken. But I think it has, your lecture has given a lot of food for thought and a lot of critical thinking that we'll have to do around the question of feminist foreign policy. Thank you. There are so many questions, I think, and can all those who have asked Dr. Shivali Kumar, can you unmute yourself and ask the questions yourself? Yeah. Ma'am Kawatra, will you be managing the Q&A? Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Harshaji, will you be managing Q&A? Yeah. First one is Dr. Shivali Kumar. Are you there?
Oh, yes, I'm there. I've
Yeah,
been
please
listening,
unmute yourself. And just,
can you hear me?
yes, we can. You can
Okay.
even show your video. No problem.
Okay, thank you so much for the very interesting panel discussion that has happened. It's a wide range, beginning with Dr. Lavanya and Farida ji and then Preeti. Vibhuti ji really encapsulated the entire panel discussion when she started off with the whole idea of feminist foreign policy. I have two questions which any one of you can answer. I have looked at, you have shared, some of you have shared the strategies, but there is considerable knowledge of sustainable livelihoods among women in most of the southern countries, and they largely remain, in one corner, or they're add-in star to discussions, they're not really brought into the center of the discussions. So how do we make them, their knowledge systems, as the center of the discussions on climate change and many others, which should be part of the foreign policy? How do we strategize around it and make it the core of the global discourse? That is our challenge. So if there are any strategies or any experiential ways in which any one of you have done, I would like a quick share on that. And shall I talk about the second question? Okay, the second question is, how do we address the extremely masculine, complex, as you said, many of you said, technocratic, corporate-driven, and scienticized discussions? The climate change seems to be out there somewhere and nothing related to people's realities. And also the very masculine spaces in terms of discourse, geography, where gender is seen as a women's issue and not really about all genders and their responsibility too. Sometimes a lot of discourse just comes down to gender being all about women, and Preeti has pointed out it's not all about women. But how do we then bring out the inequalities, the patriarchal processes, and the ways in which these discussions are happening in the larger global framework? For example, in G20, the papers are very clearly written from a feminist point of view, so-called. But actually in the ground, there was no involvement of people in the discourses that happened at the G20. Even we didn't know what's happening in the ground. There was no presence of people, even in middle-class feminists who are largely, seen as in most of the corridors. There was no participation. If there is no participation, how come they've come up with this kind of language? It's obviously a borrowed language. So the whole question of participation, who participates, how they participate, whose voice is heard and whose voice is not heard, is something that we really need to, think, debate, and strategize around and bring these voices to forefront. So this is just a question for us to think about strategy.
Who would like to go first? All three of you are invited.
Okay, thanks. I'll maybe very briefly. Oh yeah, whoever.
Okay.
Else, no problem.
Okay.
Yes, but
I would just touch upon on the sustainable livelihood and food production issue. And Shirley Kumar really pointed out very nicely. But before that, I just wanted to make a comment on Lavanya when she was talking about like our rivers are transboundary rivers, you know, our hillsides. So we are not, our solutions has to be transboundary also. For example, feminists in India, are they raising the question that why Tista barrage is not, Tista deal is not made yet, you know? Our Prime Minister is going to India and Modi ji talking, having nice dinners, but they are not signing the treaty. And also Farakka barrage is destroying, you know, our western part of Bangladesh. And really it's destroying our food production, and it's very, very dangerous. And on the other hand, like when there is in Meghalaya, there is deforestation, then we get flash flood, untimely, you know, flood, and that affects our food production. So these are some of the things that between the two countries, how our feminists in these two countries can also raise the issues to our policymakers, particularly like in India, you know, and say that you have to do it, you know. So this is one thing. And this regarding, you know, the sustainable food production, you know, we find that most of the developed countries are imposing seeds, like genetically modified seeds, hybrid seeds. Not only that, they are imposing pesticides and chemical fertilizer, and also different technologies that is destroying our sustainable livelihood, sustainable food system. So I don't know how feminist foreign policy will help, you know, in stopping all this nonsense, and you know, how they can really help our farmers. But what we are doing, like the sovereignty question, you know, like let's also talk about sovereignty. We should not only talk about foreign policy, we should also talk about sovereignty. So if people have sovereignty, if women have sovereignty, women's sovereignty, women's knowledge sovereignty, women's own sovereignty will be able to confront these, you know, aggressions from. And also nowadays, I think one thing, Vibhuti and Preeti, I think we have to accept that now there is no more states. Most of them are corporations, corporate-led states. So they are actually listening to Monsanto, Bayer, and all this. So we have to understand that we have to actually, we have to fight the corporations. At this, you know, this is my response.
Lavanya.
To talk. Yes, I totally agree with the views presented by fellow panelists and also by Shivli Kumar ma'am. The indigenous systems are very much key to the indigenous consciousness has to be integrated into climate thought. And right now, I mean, as was demonstrated by very beautifully by Farida ji and Preeti ji, there is a very top-down Western hegemonic way of talking about climate change, and we are not adequately decolonized in the sense. So an alternative form of thinking about climate change from the bottom up, from the grassroots. Exactly. So, you know, where you start with indigenous knowledge, start with local coping and adaptation mechanisms that women are primarily leading through either their work in food or in the agrarian sector, or even in water management and so on. So the bottom-up approaches have to be strengthened, and that's where civil society partnerships are primarily important. And I particularly really loved the two speakers, who are much senior to me, and brought out so well the hypocrisy of the West in terms of historic emissions, and how the West has primarily been the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and they bear significant responsibility to the current state of climate change today, and the continued fossil fuel subsidies that Western governments have continued to subsidize the fossil fuel industry. And there is today they are sitting on these positions of power and talking about technocratic fixes and systemic changes in carbon capture and so on. And they are also known to export emissions. Western countries import goods and services from countries which have lower environmental regulations. And these effects are very important, and they get, and we are today in the global South who are, the creation of the third world, those aspects, or the labeling surrounding our systems and our knowledge. I didn't have time to address it, but I'm so glad that it did get addressed. And my response to what Professor Shibli Kumar says, and I'm happy to be corrected if she has an alternate view, is to look at bottom-up approaches and bring in indigenous communities to lead the discussion on climate policy, and maybe step aside if we have to. Yeah. Thank you.
I think Shuli, it's so lovely to see you after so many years. Lovely. I'm not seeing you, I'm just hearing you. It feels like a family. And it's so disappointing, because I believe this was one of the knowledge partner, no? When you knowledge partner on this G20 or some engagement group, I thought, and you are saying that you all at this also did not know what was going on. But, I've seen this is not just the problem with India hosting. I've seen this even when Germany hosted many years ago. Each host country, they just control, the government controls this whole space. And the whole thing is so choreographed that even though they talk about Jan Bhagidari and all that is all handpicked and choreographed, and it's nothing is left to, last minute addition or that kind of a thing. And it is in G20, I know this is not today's topic, but I'm just saying that if G20 is becoming an important global policy space, because UN is losing, unfortunately, its that kind of a role in global governance and in policy setting. And if G20 is emerging as that, then if you remember, like, I don't know, I'm sure Vibhuti-ji, you would recollect that how civil society in the 80s, when the UN was also not accessible, and how we all used to fight, and then came that ECOSOC status. Whatever, even if it is difficult, you have to get those passes and registration and get observer status and blah, blah. But at least there is a system for us to go online and register for, if I want to attend COP28, I can go as a civil society, register and attend COP28. There will be certain meetings which will be just for the government, but as civil society, maybe any one of us were able to attend G20 if we just wanted to go and register and attend. That's not there. I think we need to raise this issue as a loud civil society voice, that this is just not it's not acceptable. That this has to be a open, okay, you do your government, whatever the delegation does, that also should be transparent. But as civil society, we should be allowed to participate in these policy spaces. But as so beautifully, I think Farida and Lavanya have shared, Shuli, there are so many examples on the ground that where women-led development has, with using not consultants from World Bank. And, you remember when we were doing our research in PUSERD, it's all these World Bank consultant stories used to come forward, right? So, of course, there is all these, such beautiful examples when women's knowledge skills are recognized, and women may be, economically poor, but that doesn't mean they don't have knowledge and skills of how to actually frame the development agenda. And that is, so I feel that, if we have not yet, I feel, I know I'm going to get criticized because people hate this government so much, and I might get seen as I'm supporting Modi.
but that's not the case. But I feel in this G20, we have gotten little bit of opportunity, which we should grab and really push and get these governments to do something about it. Because they have said certain things on paper, we should now take those things and make sure that they get actually translate into proper action plan and really deliver certain things that we would want. Because our government is really great on this. I'm talking about our wonderful Indian government. In projecting itself that it's actually listening to the global south, maybe they're doing better than what the north countries are doing. And so there is a language which is integrated in the G20, which does seem like it's coming from global south. And so these are things which I think we should see it as an opportunity and really look at our strategy, how we push. Okay, you said it in G20, it was your declaration. And what are you going to do about it? So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you, Preeti. Now, Radha Paudel, will you ask your question? Please unmute yourself.
Ma'am, can we take 2 to 3 questions together?
Yeah,
Okay.
but then they are of a different nature. We can't take them together.
Okay.
Radha Paudel's question is very different. Yeah. Radha, are you there? Hello?
Radha ji, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, ma'am.
Can
Meanwhile,
we move to Pranab Acharji?
Pranav ji, Saida ji, Ahana ji, Kiran ji.
Yeah. Zulfikar ji?
Yes.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Please introduce yourself.
Ma'am, I am Pranab Acharya. Actually, I want to know that I am hearing all your statements, and I am eager to know that in this title, Feminist Foreign Policy, what about the feminine of this poor departing women's features or role in this imagination?
The question you have asked is that will mainstream allow feminist as a decision maker, whether it is climate change or a war situation like Ukraine? That's your question, no? Hello?
No, that's a different question.
Okay.
That was my first
Well, the
question.
first thing which you had asked, that you had asked, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Vibhuti ji, can you repeat? I'm not clear. I understood the question.
The question was that will mainstream allow feminist as a decision maker, whether it is a climate change or a war situation like Ukraine?
Mainstream. He means
Mainstream,
mainstream.
M-A-L-E, yeah, mainstream.
Mainstream.
Not mainstream, yeah, mainstream.
I think the answer is very clear that they would. Now, if that was the case, I think nobody would even talk about feminist foreign policy. There is foreign policy every country has. You know, even in the developed countries, the need for having a feminist foreign policy because they saw this gender disparity, then gender inequality, even in their own policies. You know, whatever policy they have for the other countries, maybe they were not concerned about it, but they, within themselves, they saw the disparity. So the only thing we are concerned that if Sweden has a feminist foreign policy, does that automatically make feminist for Bangladesh? So whether Swedish foreign policy becomes issues in other countries like Bangladesh. So that is kind of the thing that we are still asking. And also we are seeing that they are not static, you know, so one person starts the feminist foreign policy and other person stops it. So it's an ongoing process. And I think it's not, the answer is that still.
Sorry to interrupt, ma'am.
Very much there. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, madam. Actually, what I'm saying is that in relation, foreign policy, feminism presented mainstream as male stream. Mainstream as male stream. They called mainstream as male stream. And I am asking from
Feminist,
that point of view. I am asking from that point of view that whether, as one madam mentioned, that in a group of meeting, 5,029 member female was available there out of 5,000. On that ground, I want to know that will they accept the female reason as a most vital point?
I
Can you
don't,
go?
yeah, I don't think so yet, because it's a process we have to, this is why we just cannot just say by the increase in numbers of women participating, but who is participating and what perspective is being projected.
Also voice and
Even among the,
representation.
even among the feminists, it has to be clear that which perspective is presented.
Very important. Very, very important. Yeah. Now, Ahana Chaudhary, are you there? Mr. Zulfikar? Hello?
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. I am Hana Chaudhary, a research scholar from Tezpur University, Assam. So my question is that, first of all, the presentations were very insightful and enabled us to understand how to locate like feminist analysis in terms of locating the binaries as well as diluting the binaries across the national and local governance systems, and how climate change creates sort of preferable space for the feminist ideas and to emerge and in process, to reflect in process. So my first question is that, whether the corporate social responsibility can also emerge as an idea when we talk about the understanding of feminist discourses within climate change and sustainability, because in the current stage of neoliberalism, there are a lot of companies and corporates who are also involved in the smart city projects and sort of engaging with women farmers also to sort of commercialize their products or involve more fertilizers and better equipments within the farmlands, while trying to bring in certain kind of ethical sensibilities along with economic responsibilities. So whether the feminist analysis or the feminist way of looking at issues of sustainability can find a more better space with corporate social responsibility. And secondly, Lavanya ma'am specifically talked about the translation of bureaucratic knowledge from the larger structures to that of the community levels for the women to engage. So if we talk about civil societies or the NGOs, how can we ensure that the translation of the knowledge is taking place in a transparent manner? Because, for instance, I come from Assam, so we have Zoom cultivations in many areas of the hills, but then it is also considered to be, at the larger structure, it is also considered to be a misnomer. So how can we deal with the conflict in understandings of the local cultures in agriculture or farming? So these are two of my questions. Thank you so much.
I just want to touch upon this smart city project because this is and in the name of climate change, they are bringing in GMOs and different kind of technologies and making women do it. And so there is nothing feminist in it. It is actually corporate, action. And also, I think corporate social responsibility is a misnomer in terms of like, they are keeping their profit and, in Bangla, there is a saying, I don't know, in Hindi it is there, Goru mere juta dam. You kill the cow and then give a shoe, your leather shoe to us. So that is kind of things corporate social responsibility is. So I don't see any feminist thing in corporate socialism. And also we should not be naive in that, we are dealing with capitalism and, patriarchy and capitalism. So it is a profit of the corporations, and that we have to deal with, that there is no question about it.
Yeah, if I may come in.
Yeah.
So the corporate social responsibility, as Farida ji just nicely said, only about the 2% of the profits have to be set aside for reciprocity to the communities. That's the idea. But 98% of the profits are made by extracting from those communities in a very in the capitalistic order, which is all about scant respect for labor regulations, minimum wages, scant respect for impacts on the environment. You look at a mining industry, or you look at a dam construction, or any of these developmental projects run by corporates, the corporate government nexus is very difficult to beat in terms of the money power and the muscle power. And so, as ma'am rightly said, it is a misnomer, because although 2% of profits is setting aside, 98% of profits.
Also mafia power.
Absolutely. Mafia power. There is forms of power. It's very masculinist in nature, and it is undermines poor livelihoods, and it's a very extractive relationship with the environment. So the 98% profit machinery is through accumulation by dispossession of certain groups, continuous accumulation by dispossession. So that's my 2 cents.
So, Vibhuti ji, I just wanted to share something which, I was greatly inspired by. Maybe a year or a year and a half ago, I attended a conference which was on Indian Farmers Conference, and there were farmers from all over India. It was held in Bangalore. And I grew up in Bombay, so I understand Marathi. So I found some farmers. Particularly, there was a group which came from Maharashtra, Vidarbha area, which is for others who are not from India, to know this is the drought prone, and this is where the farmers' suicide incidents were very extensive, and very horrible case studies and things have emerged from there. So there was a group of maybe around 40-50 farmers from Vidarbha had come. And I was sitting with the women farmers. There were about 20 women farmers in that group. So I was sitting with them, and because I could talk in Marathi, I could have a conversation with them. And so I would just started chit chat, like, how did you all come? How many of you have come, and what? And so they shared that they came for the first time. They came by a flight. They took a plane to come from Vidarbha to, that must be from Nagpur to Bangalore. They took a flight. So I thought, oh, that is great that the organizer, I just assumed. So I said, it was great that the organizers funded your flight, you could come. So they said, no, they did not. I said, then who paid? We paid. So there was such a pride in saying, I said, what, how did this, like, what happened? So then they told me the story. They said we were in such bad situation because the rivers in our region had dried up. And, we could not even, we used to get 3 crops. We could not even get 1 crop, because even if there was a monsoon, the water would just go away and the rivers would not have any. But then an NGO along with government partnership, and they brought some corporate money. I know it did have corporate money. What they did was they empowered the local women's collective to take care of the rivers. But it was not just the desilting or building dams on the river, but it was looking at river as a whole ecosystem. And it was all done by local women's knowledge.
of how to take care of rivers, like where you need to plant trees, where the water flow is, where the cash flow is, how to maximize that the water, maximum water, rainwater collects in the river. It reached that the groundwater level increased by, I don't know how many meters. And now they can again get 3 crops. And so they were poor farmers. They were in such poverty. And just by taking care of their rivers by local women's knowledge, and the government gave them NREGA money, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act money, to do this work. And they were able to totally transform their life. So it's such a, so things can work also if women are at the center of development, and to recognize that they have skill and knowledge and they can totally take care of it.
No, but this happened only after union. They became organized. Makam under the leadership of Mahila Utthana Adhikar Manch, and they came up. The representation, voice, researches, evidence-based recommendations given by Makam resulted in the local level policy changes. No, so I think that's the moral of the story, that they were collective endeavor which they made, and they used the collective wisdom. So that is very important. Yeah, it's a very very encouraging example.
Now we need positive stories also, no?
Navadanya, Seed Savers, DDA's efforts in Karnataka, drought-prone area, all of them are very, very alternatives they have shown, the local alternatives. Yes. Yeah. So now we have, I think, Mr. Zulfikar, would you like to ask your question? Yeah. I think that has been discussed. Yeah. These 2 questions have been already discussed. Kiran Chauhan,
he's not in the meeting. Ma'am, I don't think he's in the meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think.
I think there was also a question by Shailendra Kaurji.
She said that it is not there because it is just, she said, what would be the best example to go through to understand exact value-based message of this think talk. So that. Yeah. So now can we go for the final round?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, all 3 speakers, panelists, please, what would be your last word and what is the path ahead? What are the future action plan that people can, because there are social activists, there are researchers, there are scientists, there are women activists. So what is your message? Yeah. Way ahead.
Ma'am, do I have permission to speak, please?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Ma'am, Shailendra Gaur is my name, and I'm working with Public Works Department, Building and Roads, Government of Haryana. I'm working there as assistant engineer.
Yeah.
I ask you this question, like, for me, there are certain examples where the entire success and the entire setup and the entire program, even if we take example of ISRO or DRDO or some engineering research projects, the entire program, that was a sure success because of the women empowerment and the knowledge bank they all have. Even I'm a researcher also, and in my research, I have met 3 doctorate researchers, and of course they are women, and they have helped me a lot. Actually, what message actually we need to understand to make it as a primary factor to grow in a society, as a part and as a must factor. That is what exactly I want to know.
Ma'am, would you like to answer?
Yeah. response from you. Hello.
Yes, ma'am, please.
You are asking me or the panelists?
Any
Hello?
and anyone, ma'am, anyone. Because for me, you all are one of those great persons who have knowledge. I'm just a beginner.
The similar experience of Maharashtra PWD, where they are constructing 1,200 kilometers of road, passing 6 districts. I think there also it is supported by Asian Development Bank, and there the gender component is very, very strong. And I think all the decision makers in this whole project, right from the head environmental engineer to a finance person or also the scientist, all of them are women. And I think they have brought in so many experiences of other Asian countries. How can gender be in, how the whole project can be engendered. And first the response of PWD was that we are constructing road. What do we have to do with gender? No, that was the approach. And when they started giving examples of how it is not only just road construction is not a just a gender neutral activity. It connects the villages with the main road, bus starts stopping, enrollment of women and children increases, it ensures safety, economic activities expand. You need to have the toilets on the road so that and this toilet should not be only for men and gender neutral toilet, but there should be specific toilet for children, person with disability. So I think slowly and gradually they opened up, because when the concrete examples were given. So I think it's very important that this kind of dialogues, where multi-sectoral dialogues, where scientific community, engineers, technocrats, women studies scholars, and the action groups at a grassroots, no, they interact with each other and come out with the collective wisdom. That's very important, because it is inclusive, not only of women, but it's inclusive of children, elderly, persons with disability, people from the marginalized section, all of them get included in the process. It's not, resources are there, but how wisely to use resources and how to make it inclusive is very important. Like in city like Bombay, we have 2,300 toilets for men, but there are hardly 112 toilets for women. They are also never clean. There are no doors. They are this. It's basically the gender blindness of the authorities. It's not the sanitation budget of Bombay is 40% of total budget of Bombay Municipal Corporation is for sanitation. And imagine Bombay Municipal Corporation is the wealthiest corporation in whole of Asia. And still there is a gender blind. And then the campaign started where 40 NGOs with young women activists, they started this whole Right to Pee campaign. So I think, and then the system started responding. No? So there are many such local level experiences that, which we need to amplify their voice and also empower them.
But ma'am, basically,
representation, but also their voices has to be heard. Yeah.
But
ma'am, there is one simple hurdle, what I could understand. And that hurdle is the early primary education sector. This is my personal experience in a rural area, because most of us people, they are from rural area. Even I'm from a village. So one simple thing is there, that we are not giving a vision to the women section or girl child. We are basically giving as a whole new vision only as a societal part. This is something what I experience. I might be wrong.
Yeah,
but
now
at primary,
now
primarily at elementary education, at primary education, even till up to 10+2 level, girl child is not having that vision, and to support that vision, I think there is no such program. When you
and I think that is the effort, no, of the women's groups, and all the 3 speakers, they talked about that also, no, local level initiative. So we are starting now. You have also understood it, so you become our ambassador, and in your area you started. Whenever you need support, we will be with you.
No,
So
but
I think that is
in
Yeah.
Bangladesh, I just want to share that in Bangladesh, there have been many mega projects, like including the Padma Bridge and, metro rails and all these things. But they have really, disregarded women's needs and also displaced many women and households where women are the most affected and women's voices are not heard. So this is one of the issues that we are now, protesting against, that for the mega projects, it may look very nice, but behind the scene, women are suffering.
Ma'am, can I add one sentence if you allow, if time allows?
Time is up. We have exceeded time limit by 15 minutes. I think you can directly discuss with all of us.
I'm coming directly to the point, ma'am. Until or unless we doesn't follow our Vedic science system, which says, because in our domestic life, if we see our old traditions, every process that includes a particular kind of science.
Yeah.
And that is being forgotten and never been taught in school level even. If that thing happens, then the girl child will have exposure to the scientific world. This is my suggestion. If somebody, if your platform can forward this suggestion to anywhere, whichever place you can.
But even after getting exposure, she should have a power to speak, a platform, a voice and representation. That is most
Ma'am, you are there.
Yeah.
Ma'am,
Yeah,
like you are there, then you have to make your place in this world. Even that is true for every man also. If you cannot speak at a while coming forefront, no one will listen you.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. Understood. Okay. So
Thank
can
you,
we
ma'am.
now conclude the session? Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks much, ma'am.
First of all, I would like to thank all three panelists for an extremely erudite and so many mind-boggling issues that they covered in their erudite presentations. This is a very, very important and challenging and highly complex issue, the question of climate change concerns in Asia and Pacific region, because Asia is the region most vulnerable to climate change, and India is ranked as one of the most climatic vulnerable countries in the world, frequently affected by natural disasters. Top-down policies and technocratic solution we show. So our panelists also gave us example that how they are creating disasters, and they are exacerbating disasters, lowering the environmental norms. It is not only in South Asia, I think all over Asia, the nations after nations are lowering the environmental norms, which is resulting in varied forms of climatic crisis. The conspicuous effect of climate change can be perceived in the form of natural disasters, degradation of environment that are striking to the eyes, but indirect cascading effect due to human-induced disasters is debated, but goes unscrutinized. I think all three, both, especially Farida ji and Lavanya ji, highlighted that. And because of women's unequal participation in decision-making processes that sustains due to failure to make structural changes. Climate change has further exacerbated the food crisis with loss of food production, loss of food access, impacting children, elderly, particularly pregnant women due to malnutrition. An intergovernmental panel on climate change, what is known as a IPCC, the sixth assessment report highlights that future exposure to climatic hazards is also increasing globally due to socio-economic and development trends, including migration, growing inequality, urbanization, consumerist and hedonistic lifestyle that was very powerfully projected by the PowerPoint presentation of Lavanya ji. Intergovernmental panel also noted that rural women in the developing countries are among the groups most vulnerable to climate change. And I think Farida ji gave so many examples of Bangladesh, and also the work which the ecofeminists like Dr. Vandana Shiva and We Do Women and Environment Organization is doing. The gender differential impact of climate change in terms of storms and sandstorms, drought, and ultimately untimely rain, untimely snowfall, melting of glaciers, forest fires, typhoons, deluge, and floods are violent that demand interventions in climate generated to be conducted in a gender-aware manner, and efforts of relief and rehabilitation must have a gender responsiveness. I think we all know what happened at the time of tsunami or the earthquake in Latu, or the cyclones that happened during the pandemic. Climate change disasters generate instability, insecurity, homelessness, dislocation, loss of life, like support, resulting in a multifaceted gender-based violence affecting livelihoods and biodiversity through heat, drought, as water levels rise and require other strategies. So for food security on this planet, farmers, especially in drought-prone regions, need to be encouraged, supported to adopt cost-effective and location-specific climate resilience technologies that came out even in the discussion, that why we need to respect the local knowledge, which communities have inherited over generations. We need to understand, as the renowned literature Krishna Sabathy states, and I quote, "Whoever the homeland may belong to, it is not merely a piece of geography. It is also not just history, nor is it the rivers of the region or the mountains. It is all those things that keep getting absorbed in very being, whether you want it or not." And hence, when we talk about the feminist foreign policy, whether you use that term or you call it a gender equality policy, gender responsive policy for climate change in Asia and Pacific, we need to direct our attention to the socio-economic transformation required for climate mitigation, manage the negative consequences of climate mitigation on vulnerable populations, and enable just transition towards low emission development and ensure sustainable development. Thank you for such an enriched discussion and so many learnings and so many takeaways we have from this panel discussion. Please be prepared for tomorrow. Tomorrow, the focus will be on peace. Again, we will have a extremely renowned and very experienced panelists who have worked at a ground level in the Asian countries. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. With the chair's permission, can we move to the vote of thanks?
Yeah, please.
As we come to the end of day one of Feminist Foreign Policy in the Asia Pacific region, an online international workshop program, a 2-day immersive online discussion workshop, I, Harsha Quatra, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI New Delhi. We are grateful to our experts for the day one session, Ms. Farida Akhtar, Ms. Lavanya Shanbhog Arvind, and Ms. Preeti Daruka for taking out their valuable time and giving us an opportunity to learn from this program. We thank our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel, ma'am, for her insights. We thank all of our participants who have raised questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We would also like to thank all of you for gracing our book launch of Advocating Feminist Foreign Policy for India. The book is absolutely free. Hope you guys give it a read. We look forward to welcoming you tomorrow, that is 20th September 2023, for our second day of this program by distinguished experts Ms. Irina Santiago, Dr. Wahida Nair, Dr. Atika Noor Alami on the theme Feminist Foreign Policy in the Asia Pacific region for Transactional Solidarity for Peace. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.